All right, we are wrapping up our series When Faith and Culture Collide. And we've been looking at what it looks like to live in a world that can feel extremely divided. We've been looking at all this chaos, all these things that make it difficult for us to have conversations and honestly difficult to have relationships sometimes. Anybody been divided over the last couple of years over any issue at all? No one? That's interesting. So in my world, it's like constant, right? Like we're constantly having conversations, or actually, let me say it this way, constantly avoiding certain conversations, certain things we just don't talk about anymore. There used to only really be 2. Now there's about 10. And when we talk about that, we've been looking at it through the lens of what's going on, what's pulling for our attention, what lies are we buying into, what is causing all this division. And Buck shared a quote from Sun Tzu, which says, really the power in these battles that we have and these wars that we're in is in knowing thy enemy. And we could spend weeks on end just talking about each topic and how we specifically step into that. But really, we want to wrap up this series looking at a couple of questions, which is, where am I in all this? How do I contribute, intentionally or not, or how do I heal the division and tension and then therefore exhaustion in not just my life, but in everybody that I love and in the communities that I live and move? How do I play a part in all this? Now, I think the majority of people, and you may disagree, don't point to anybody near you, but the majority of people are not really divisive. Like they're not seeking to be divisive, right? They're not like waking up in the morning going, I really hope to rip some families apart today. I really hope I can bring a lot of drama and chaos into the workplace. And I actually don't consider myself a divisive person. I really do love like debate / argument, but like all in a friendly way. I love to play devil's advocate. I like people guessing what I think, but in general, I don't love division. But I found myself creating some division or being a part of a divisive moment in 2020, and I want to share with you how that went. Because when Buck and Jeremy said, hey, Jen, would you like to wrap up our series When Faith and Culture Collide, I had to sit down with myself and say, when was the last time you had a big collision between what you believe and what you're passionate about and how you're acting out your faith? And in 2020, I had that moment. I was sitting in my house, and you guys remember 2020, right? COVID, elections, racial tension, just a few things going on that year. And as I was sitting home, my phone blew up with a group text, and someone had shared like a screenshot of a post. Now, I want to show you that. This isn't exactly what it looked like. This is just our recreation of it. But it was a political yard sign that had a particular candidate's name on it, but the yard sign had been replaced with his name, and the term racist had been put. I'll give you about 3 seconds to guess the sign. And then the comments were amazing. And I got this text, and to be honest, this is not about like who I voted for or who I didn't vote for or anything about that. That actually didn't bother me. Even this person's opinion on this particular candidate didn't really bother me because I enjoy kind of that diversity in my life. But the content of the post was colorful. Lots of colorful words that might have begun with F, every other word. And basically saying anybody that voted for this candidate must also have these ideals and these opinions, but so colorfully and eloquently said. That even didn't so much kind of get me fired up. I was like, okay, well, everybody has their own opinion. It was then the text that came after this text, and it was, this person was just elected to our school board. Now, what? Now, what bothered me about that was, again, not this person's opinions, but it was that I now feel as a parent in a school system that can I actually come and have a conversation with you? If I had a concern for my students or for the school environment they are in, could I actually bring that to you in an honest way? Because you've just excluded probably at least half of your constituents. And something rose up in me because I do think there is a different expectations on those that decide to take up the mantle of leadership. And it just kind of lit something in me, and I was like, I'm going to use my voice. I'm going to email the school board. I'm sure I was the only one. And so I was like, that's it. In my group text with all my friends who had already emailed the school board, I said, I'm going to email the school board. And I emailed, and it was like, I tried to use as many big words as possible, maybe use some stats, like say some really smart things where it was like, hey, how in the world are we supposed to be able to feel comfortable coming to a board if this is how someone that has stepped into this leadership position feels? How can anybody bring their voice to a conversation where they've already been silenced? And then it was, what are you going to do about it, school board? And this quiet voice kind of spoke over my heart and said, hey, you don't know that person. But if you have a problem with that person that made that post, just a thought, what about talking to that person? Okay, fair enough. So I got on Facebook and I found this person. And I sent a message with this. I said, I'm sure you're aware, slightly gone viral in our little world. I just have some questions for you. Help me understand this. Help me understand why you said that. Help me understand how you think this is okay. Help me understand how I'm supposed to be able to bring my voice to you. Help me understand. And she responded. First, that was a private message sent with a small group of friends. It was also sent months prior to even deciding to run for the school board. So I had taken it totally out of context. How many of us would feel comfortable with some of our private text messages and our private messages being displayed and going viral? But even better than figuring that information out, we started a dialogue. We actually messaged back and forth for weeks. And she asked me, she said, tell me what you're passionate about. What are you passionate about in terms of your students and in terms of this community? And I asked her the same question, and some things we were actually in sync on, and a lot we weren't. And we didn't actually change each other's minds, but we had a conversation. And you know what's funny is at the end of it, she said, I just want to take a moment and I just want to thank you. I want to thank you for coming right to me and not going to the school board. You're welcome. I mean, and I said, I kind of have to confess to you, I went along with the bandwagon and I railed you to the school board first. But I'm so glad I came back and had a conversation now, right? Super Christian. And we kind of continued to chat a little bit, and it kind of tapered off, and I checked in a few months later just to see how it was going, because I'm sure when you've been smeared like that, it can't be easy, right? It can't be easy to go to the grocery store, can't even go to H-E-B probably without getting some looks or assuming you're getting some looks. I had fallen into this trap of us versus them. There's two ways that we think. We think in binary thinking, or we think in directional thinking. Now, binary thinking is like in, out, us, them, yes, no, stop, go. We love binary thinking. It feels safe, it feels controlled. Actually, the largest portion of our brain is wired in a way that it thrives in binary thinking. But then there's directional thinking, which is go-ish. Them-ish, right-ish, wrong-ish, right? It's kind of like the ish of our brain. And the irony is that this is actually what separates us from other species. We have the ability to step into both binary thinking and directional thinking. But what I had fallen into was binary thinking. I felt at some point like this person was against me. It's funny, we've been talking about know thy enemy and the power over the last few weeks of knowing what force, and who is actually against us. But there's actually equal power from knowing who your enemy is not. It informs your strategy in a war. It informs your tactics in a battle. So we need to know who our enemy is not. And even though there was something in me when I first read that post that made me feel like in order to defend my ideals, I had to attack her, but she wasn't the enemy. She is not my enemy. In fact, in some ways, very literally, in our own community, she's my neighbor. Our enemy is not our neighbor. But all those topics we've been looking at the last few weeks can sure make it feel like it. And this idea of getting trapped in binary thinking, us versus them, is not just new to today, right? It feels way more intense today. But Jesus battled with the same thing. In fact, it's kind of what got him in trouble. He tried to push his culture out of binary thinking. And he said, hey, what if we looked at something different? What if we actually explored the purpose behind a rule or a law? What if we actually explored what it really means to be a neighbor? And he got in trouble every time he tried to bring up that conversation. And you can watch the religious leaders specifically trying to consistently nudge him back to binary thinking. No. It's us, them. It's Jew, Gentile. It's right, wrong. It's the law or you're breaking it. And Jesus is like, yeah, but what if we sat and had a conversation about that? You know, one of the conversations he had with someone trying to put him into a situation of binary thinking is probably one of the most well-known passages, right? It's the parable of the Good Samaritan. And in Luke chapter 10, we read this. An expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. Teacher, he asked, what must I do to inherit eternal life? And what is written in the law, he replied. How do you read it? He answered, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. You've answered correctly, Jesus replied. Do this and you will live. But he wanted to justify himself. So he asked Jesus, one who is my neighbor, right? Here's this. So I need to do some binary thinking with you, Jesus. Like, you're telling me to love someone, but who exactly do I have to love? Can I narrow the scope? Because this expert in the law would have understood his neighbor to be a fellow Jew. But he wanted to make sure Jesus understood that that's all that it could be too. And Jesus tells this story. In reply, Jesus said, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, he passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn and took care of him there. And on the next day, he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper and said, look after him. And when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expenses you may have. So which of these, he's asking the expert, do you think was the neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robber? And the expert says, it was the third one. And Jesus says, go and do likewise. Now, the cultural implications can easily get lost on us now, right? Like we read this, Samaritan, Levite, priest. These are not necessarily terms and things that we label each other as. But for them, this is a radical story, right? You are telling a Jewish expert of the law that this is not the only way to do life. You are not the only ones that are capable of caring. And Samaritans are not just, we just don't like Samaritans. Like they're ostracized. They are actually of Jewish descent, but they're kind of like Jews gone rogue. Sorry, that sounds like a fun movie. So like they are totally ostracized. You don't communicate with them. You don't associate with them. That is not someone that you connect with. So I want to ask this morning, where do you see yourself in the story? Right? Grab a character. Where do you find yourself in this story? Are you the priest? Are you the Levite? Do you feel like the Samaritan? Maybe some of you are exhausted and you just feel like you've been beaten this past 2 years, so you feel more like the robber. And part of me wants to be, totally I would be the Samaritan, a little bit on the outside, but super caring. And if I'm honest though, I've actually just played all the roles. So I want to look at all these characters real quick and find out maybe where we can fit into some of these sometimes. So let's start with the priest. A priest is going down the road and he sees someone who looks dead, looks like he's passed, and he passes by on the other side. So now for a priest, to touch a dead body would have been defiling Jewish law. And he's not just defiling Jewish law, he's like a priest defiling Jewish law. He would have been excluded from the ceremonies in the temple. And even though there's this thought that he's going down from Jerusalem, so maybe he could have gone away and still had time to become ceremonially clean, he still passes by because that's the rule. You don't touch a possible dead body, or you are now ceremonially unclean. And if I'm honest, sometimes, here's the deal. I love rules. I have like a rules-oriented personality. I think things should be right and wrong, and I'm confused when you guys don't obey my rules. I don't understand why you struggle so much. But there's a difference between the letter of the law and the spirit of the law. And Jesus is constantly trying to teach and saying, hey, this isn't just some arbitrary thing we say. There's a point behind it. When we ask you to rest, to take a Sabbath, it's because it does something for you. When I tell you to manage something this way, it's because it benefits you. This is the heart. This is the spirit of the law. But this priest is caught up in the letter of the law. You do not touch a dead body, even if you don't know it's dead. You just don't touch it. You know what I think sometimes when we inadvertently create division, one of the things that happens is we've got this message that says, I must agree with you in order to love you well. Now, when I say that, we logically go, well, no, we know that's not true, but think about how it plays out in your life, right? That you must agree with people in order to actually be close to them, to love them well, to do life with them. And Jesus is like, actually, no, you don't, but he doesn't want to break the rules. Where do you struggle to hold on to your own rules? Because I think it's super important that we are passionate about our ideals and our beliefs, even if they differ from each other. I don't think you have to compromise what you think, how you vote, or what you believe in order to love others well. But this priest is wrapped up in the rules. So where do your rules get in the way? Or maybe you're more like the Levite. So a Levite going along sees someone, and he passes by on the other side as well. Now, so for a Levite, it would have been important also, of Jewish, so it would have been important for them not to be defiled by a dead body, but the strict adherence would not have been at the same level. But, and I don't necessarily know what the Levite was thinking, but if I put myself in his shoes, sometimes I just am too tired to help. I just would rather someone else have to deal with that. Anybody checked out of politics the last couple of years? Because they're just tired of it. Anybody stopped watching news? Because they're just, wow, lots of hands went up. Okay. Because they're just over it. Anybody just, when you're at a gathering and that one particular topic comes up, you just find another group to stand near? It's exhausting. Division, this is what Buck talked about week 1, right? Like there's something in us that is exhausted by these conversations. But not engaging isn't the answer either. I get it, I do it, and it takes a lot of energy to re-engage, but checking out does not move culture. It does not change the climate of culture. It actually produces a further gap. It actually creates more division because we don't use our voice. So with my situation with this school board member, I think I should have used my voice. I just wish I had slowed down enough to say better things to the right person, right? I don't think it was about me not saying what I'm thinking and believing, although honestly, that can be the tendency to be like, I'm just not even gonna have those conversations. I'm not gonna tell you what I think about COVID. I'm not gonna ask you the questions I have about this or that. I'm not gonna be honest with you. I'm not gonna talk to you about politics. It's just easier. We'll let other people have those conversations. I'm glad I used my voice. I just wish I had used it in more love and with more wisdom. But let's look at the Samaritan. Now, the Samaritan passes by, and let's just read this again, because for me, what I'm struck by is not just that he helps, it's how lavishly he helps. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. He then put the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. Look after him, he said, and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have. Now again, I can't emphasize enough, like when the expert of the law is hearing this is like Jesus looking at him and saying, this guy who you've already written off, you've canceled him, loves people better than you and your leaders. It would have been an insult. Now, I'm trying to bring it into maybe today's context, and I just want you to get in your mind, maybe the person that for you there's the biggest gap between your beliefs, your ideals, your passions, your opinions, and then maybe the person that creates the most tension or the community group that creates the most tension. And I just want to talk through a few statements and see how they sit with you, because this is maybe how it would feel to us today if we were having the same conversation. So you guys don't really love that well, but an atheist, as he travels, comes by and sees him and takes pity on him. A Republican, as she travels, comes by, loves well and takes pity on him. A Democrat, as he travels, sees the man and takes pity on him. A Muslim, as he travels, sees the man and takes pity on him. An anti-vaxxer, as they travel, sees the man, takes pity on them. A boomer or a Gen X or a millennial sees the man as he travels and takes pity on him. But a lesbian, as she travels, coming to where the man is, sees the man and takes pity on him. But a non-Texan. So now I need to tell you this. I actually requested that slide to say, but as a Tennessean, but I was informed this morning by the entire production crew. There is really just Texan and non-Texan. There are no other. Oh my God. Really? Yeah. Hey, Jeremy, if I could get a Sunday on humility, I would love to, we could broadcast that to the entire state. You guys are insane. Or we're Texan, yeah. So a Samaritan, also Jewish descent, right? But like the wrong kind of Jew, does it better in this story. Jesus is telling a story that radically transforms how this expert thinks of who is in and who is out. The expert trying to trap him in binary thinking, Jesus tries and takes him away from that. But what I love is I just kind of have to wonder if the Samaritan actually kind of is the hero in this story, not so much because of all the things he did, but because he took the time to actually see and know if the guy was dead or not. Because he took a moment to go over and actually know and see someone. That same person you got in your head before I read all those statements, when's the last time you actually took the time to have a real conversation? You know, I had a conversation with a friend this week about just this topic and this morning and our conversation today, and she was telling me how through COVID, basically that first year of COVID, her whole neighborhood, all of her friend groups like split. And the weird thing was they split without ever talking about splitting, and actually to the point where some people moved out of neighborhoods entirely. But the irony was no one ever had a conversation about it. No one ever asked questions. They weren't curious as to why do you think this way, or hey, help me understand what your thought process is, or can I share with you why this is a struggle for me? There weren't conversations. There were just assumptions, sideways conversations behind the back, right? Like when I emailed the school board instead of going directly to the person, and then there was just division. We don't afford people a conversation. You know, it doesn't take long when you become a pastor to watch just a few years, people start coming up to you and they want to know what you think about the hot topics of the day. I'm kind of glad that I actually stopped ministry right before COVID, because I would not want to be a pastor over the last several years, if I'm being honest. Because people come up to you and here's what they do. They want to know where you stand on this, and this. And you can quickly tell the people that are asking you because they want to have a conversation. And they want to actually learn from you and teach you. And the people who just want to know because they're in binary thinking and they want to know, can I be here or can I not? I want you to think of these tensions in your life. And I want you to ask, are you having a conversation? And can I also add, having an actual conversation, not are you posting on Facebook? Like actually face to face, having a conversation about these topics that I want you to be passionate about, even when you are passionately not on the same page. And this is what Jesus is constantly doing. He's constantly trying to redefine how we see the other. He's constantly trying to get us out of binary thinking. If you take all the way that Jesus manages his time and you look at it percentages, he actually spends almost half his time with poor, sick, and marginalized people, but guess what? He spends the other half of his time with healthy, wealthy, and mainstream people. Because he's trying to help the culture of his day and still trying to help us as his church stop with the division and not contribute to it, but to actually bridge the gaps in our relationship. And that's a tall order. It requires us to have conversation. It requires us to do something. You know, the way that Jesus chose to see people actually changed the world. Martin Luther King Jr., from his letters in a Birmingham jail, made this quote about the church that he had grown up in versus the church he was experiencing in the moment. He said this: "The church was not merely a thermometer that recorded the ideas and principles of popular opinion. It was a thermostat that transformed the mores of society." Buck in week 1 said, "We've made a point for a long time, but we've made very little difference." Are you a thermometer or are you a thermostat? My first sassy moment when I emailed the school board was literally just taking the temperature of the room and of the group text I'd found myself in. Reaching out to her and having a conversation was trying to actually change the temperature. Now, a thermostat, even though you may change it quickly in your room, actually takes a minute to change the temperature. It has to crank up, it has to move, things have to fire, things have to churn, right? In order to change this idea between how faith and culture collide, it's going to take time. It's not going to take just a really great, beautifully Canva verse on Facebook. It's going to require conversation to move the dial and to change the climate. If there is a gap in your relationships, and these gaps are real. Can we put that collage? Oh, perfect. Man, they're on it. Look at that. I want you to pick the one that kind of evokes the most in you. Pick it. Could it be gender issues, race issues, abortion issues? And I'm sure there's some even that maybe are popping up in your head that aren't on here. Gun rights, racial tension, vaccines, all that. Pick the one that you would want to change. That if you could change one on that screen, what would it be? And then to ask yourself, do you see the issue or are you making the people the issue? Do you see the actual battle or have you made the people your enemy? Because there are gaps between these ideas, right? And the gaps are real. And the gaps have real implications. Like the concerns that you have for one side or the other are real. You're not crazy. you're not on that one, right? The gaps have real implications, but the people aren't the gap as much as the people feel like the problem. And the only way to bridge a gap is to build a bridge, is to actually be the person that says, I'm going to start on my side to build a bridge toward you. The gap's still going to be there. You don't have to compromise your opinions, your ideals, your beliefs, or your votes. But you have to start building a bridge in order to change the temperature of the culture. In week 1, Buck said, Christianity is no longer the host culture of the United States. And when he said that, I just had to ask myself for a second, so how hospitable am I? Would someone that didn't ascribe to my particular beliefs and opinions or systems and structures feel welcome having a conversation with me? Or have I already just decided to further the gap or just to check out of the process altogether? There's 3 simple things I think we can do to help with the tension and when faith and culture collide. The first one, and I actually would argue this is the most important one, actually, if you can't do this one, just don't do any of them, is slow down. Slow down in your responses, in your comments, in your criticisms, and your judgment. Just slow down. Viktor Frankl, who's a neurologist, psychologist, and Holocaust survivor, has this amazing quote that I love. Between stimulus and response, there's a space. And in that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lives our growth and our freedom. I don't think it was wrong for me to want to say something. But if I had slowed down, maybe I would have said the better thing to the right person. Because the power is in that space. It's in just taking a moment. And when my boys were little, I found myself in a parenting rut of just rapid increasing volume commands. I don't know if there's a technical term for that in a parenting technique, but it was basically pick that up, pick that up, pick that up. I think I gave a fraction of a second in between the commands. And I felt like I'm going to try this. I'm just going to slow down a little bit. I'm going to say the thing I need them to do, and then I'm going to count to 10 slowly in my head. And what I discovered in that moment was 50% of the time, they didn't hear me. And I was frustrated with them because I felt like they were being disobedient and they weren't obeying and taking care of the thing I'd asked them to do. But it was literally they didn't hear me. Shocking. 3-year-old boys don't listen super intently. The other 50% of it was they actually started the action. Now, granted, It was about 8 seconds later than I wanted them to start the action. But they would do it. And how that de-escalated my screaming and my getting frustrated and the temper, and then it becomes a drama when if I had just counted to begin with. So I want you to get that stuff on the board again. I want you to look at all those tensions, and I want you to ask yourself, what if you just did this with your tension? Just so you know, when you're standing in front of like a couple hundred people, it's really awkward for 10 seconds it feels like a long time, but it's not. And I wonder if I had just slowed down in my text and email fury just for a minute, or if I slowed down in so many things, would it change my response? Because like Viktor Frankl says, that's the power. That 10 seconds is where your power to change culture is. Because it's going to be your response that changes the temperature of the room. Number 2, be intentional. Now, Buck said in week 1 or 2 to choose curiosity when we're engaging with others. I actually want to kind of take it up a notch. And I want you, he said stay curious. I want to encourage you to choose curiosity. Like, it's not enough just to say, I know someone who thinks differently than me. We need to have conversations with people that think differently than me. And by the way, not all your conversations have to be about the thing, Like, you can have normal conversations too. I think we've lost that in the last 2 years too. Just normal, everyday, how's the weather kind of conversations. Maybe start there. But having real conversations, intentional conversations, asking questions with people that don't think like you, that don't look like you. And you'd be shocked. We think there's some questions we can't ask because it would be offensive. But actually, you can start with that. Hey, I have a question. Totally don't want to be offensive, but I am totally, literally ignorant to this. Because the reality is I can't stand in your shoes. I can't see life through your lens. And so the only way I can develop empathy and then respond with better loving and more actionable things is if I actually try and understand you a little bit through questions. Asking vulnerable and real questions, choosing curiosity, seeking relationships with people who don't think like you. In all those spaces where you've already experienced division, maybe you had a big blow up or a big family argument. What does it look like to actually take steps to repair that? To choose to be intentional about building bridges and there are relational gaps. And number 3, just know enough to know that you don't know it all. Adam Grant came out with a book not too long ago called Think Again. It is an amazing book. It's just a bunch of research about the power behind recognizing what you don't know. Just study after study and case after case of people who realized they didn't know something and actually produced something way better because they recognized what they didn't know. I know for some people, especially Texans apparently, you don't know everything, right? You're not the only state, right? Okay, people have survived that statement. But to know that will actually empower your conversations because then you can enter into things, into dialogues, not monologues, with questions. And you can learn and you can teach. And none of that requires you to compromise what you believe or the news channel that you watch. You can still watch that. You can still think that. You can still vote that way while staying curious, while intentionally getting to know others. So there is power in recognizing your enemy, but there is equal power in recognizing you're not enemy. And if there's someone that's been in your life or a group of people that has been in your mind that you have labeled as an enemy. It's funny because I was thinking about this morning. I was thinking we should probably, if we think Jesus' like commands on how we handle our neighbors is kind of difficult, like it's way worse with enemies. You should make as many neighbors as possible because he's really going to ask you to radically love your enemies. But most of the time, the people that we feel like we're at a distance with are not the enemy. So if we can slow down and intentionally choose curiosity, I think we'd be surprised the bridges we could build. Right? That's what this whole series has been about. What's the point in talking about when faith and culture collide if we can't heal the collision? If we can't repair some of the damage? And we're repeatedly told to do that from Jesus. And I think, whether you consider yourself a follower of Christ or not, I think our life would be better if we took steps to repair those divisions. So what does it look like to know what is, know who is your enemy, know yourself, know the alternative, and actually know your neighbor? I'm going to pray for us. Father, I thank you for tension in our lives. I thank you that you give us passionate beliefs and opinions, and that you've built in each of us a unique design for us to use our voice and say things, but we can do all of that while loving our neighbor well. And that we would be challenged to not just narrow the scope or justify ourselves like the expert did, but that we would widen who we consider our neighbor, and that we would intentionally seek them. We would choose to be curious about them, what they believe, what they think, and why, and that we would then honestly be able to share our own opinions and ideas. And I think, Lord, as we did that, we'll actually see the temperature in the room change. We'll actually be that thermostat rather than just that thermometer, jumping on whatever divisive bandwagon we can for the moment. Show us the gaps in our life and empower us to love like you. Amen. Thank you guys so much. We'll see you next week.